All right, everybody, welcome to an exciting moment on our Patreon right now. This is the very first Q&A session that we are going to be hosting, and I'm really excited about this because, well, one of the things that I've been doing is working with my team on creating more value for our loyal Patreon supporters. And what we're going to be doing is at least twice a month, we're going to be hosting these Q&A sessions where essentially you can submit a question and it allows me to respond to that. I think this is actually really helpful for me because it can also potentially give me some great ideas for a video I can share with you. And again, it's just how do we provide more value and how do we say thank you for, all of your amazing support. And we're going to keep doing this and hopefully continue to keep grow this channel and, this amazing group of Patreon supporters. So in today's session, I have 5 questions. We've got 5 questions from our community. I'm going to go ahead and answer all 5 of those. And let's just go ahead and jump right into it and get started. So the first question is from Diane, who says, I'm curious about the space program. Who's doing what? Are the moon missions real? I mean, if humans landed on the moon 50 years ago, then why are they so cautious about it now? And is China's government and the USA on a space race, and what for? This is a really great question from Diane. And actually, I am in the process of writing a script to talk about the space program because this is actually a really interesting topic. As we all know, the International Space Station has been in existence for a long time, and the ISS is a really interesting effort because it's actually a collaborative effort from countries around the world. However, China has been banned from actually sending astronauts to the International Space Station, and there's going to be a very big change coming very soon. By the end of this decade, the International Space Station is basically going to be decommissioned. It's going to be brought down from orbit in space. It's basically going to be allowed to crash in, I think it's the Pacific Ocean, somewhere in the ocean, and essentially it's going to be non-usable anymore. And China is actively building the next space station. And so you're going to see very shortly, within the next few years, again, by the end of this decade, you're going to see China having the only operable space station in the universe. And so this is going to be a really interesting thing. I mean, I think space is there's a lot of unknowns, but obviously NASA has done a lot of amazing things. There's been a lot of experiments done. There's been a lot of discoveries. I really do think that exploring space is a beneficial thing. And we're going to see a very interesting situation happening where, again, China is going to be, the only country with an operable space station in the future. So I think this is something that we need to be paying attention to. And again, I am going to be making a video about this very soon. So I'm excited. Great question, and it's very relative because I think it is a big story that we're going to see continue to gain a lot of steam moving forward. Our next question is from Michael, who says, will there be war in the future? Now, this, of course, is the million-dollar question. I think everybody is fearful of this. Everybody is talking about this. And, of course, the big question really pertains to Taiwan, right? That is the key conflict point between the United States and China. I think what we are doing right now is we're moving, unfortunately, closer and closer to a military conflict between the United States and China over Taiwan. And there's a few things that, in my perspective, we really need to understand about this. Number one is we need to understand for China's perspective is that Taiwan is an absolute red line. There is no way that China will ever allow Taiwan to become an independent country. And it's really important to understand that because there's not a single country in the world that actually recognizes Taiwan as an independent country. It's basically a group of people in Taiwan that would like to become independent and like to become their own country. But even there's certain nations around the world, some very small countries that do recognize Taiwan. But what they recognize is they recognize Taiwan as the legitimate government of China. So even if they recognize Taiwan, they still recognize Taiwan as being part of China. And so really the better question here is, who's the legitimate government? Is it the Taiwanese government or is it the Beijing government? Now, ultimately, my theory on this is I believe that the answer to this is no. I don't think that we're going to war because I think that the US and Chinese economies are too intertwined. They're too important for each other. The United States depends on China. China depends on the United States. And if you could look back at my videos, I made a video entitled "Why the United States Cannot Sanction China." The real reason is that we depend on China. And also China depends on the US. China also owns a tremendous amount of US Treasury bonds. So there's a very interesting relationship there. In my prediction, I think tensions will continue to rise, but I don't think that, I mean, let's be honest, as an American, we cannot afford a war with China. We have not basically won a war since World War II. We've been involved in a tremendous amount of conflicts in Korea, in the Gulf Wars, obviously in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, in Iraq. None of these were successful for the United States. What makes us think that we can possibly win a war against China? It would be absolutely insane, and it would be basically devastation for the entire world economy. So for that reason, I think that we are not heading to a war. I think cooler heads will ultimately prevail. All right, this is a question from Jiang Miaohua. What can an ordinary U.S. citizen do here to help improve the Sino-U.S. relationship? I think this is a really great question because this is something that I hear a lot. And I think many of you know my story. I spent the last 5 years living in Vancouver, Canada. Vancouver has a tremendous amount of Chinese population. There's a lot of Chinese expats, a lot of people that have immigrated. And, as we know, in North America, there has been a tremendous amount of anti-China, anti-Asian hate crime. And I get this question a lot. What can you do, for the average ordinary citizen? I always say this. The best thing that we can do is be a leader in our community, right? I mean, even for me, I've built up a large social presence. I mean, I'm still a relatively small person. I'm trying my best to leverage my message of peace, of collaboration. The best thing is, for example, many of you know I've relocated back to the United States. Well, I'm currently living in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm getting involved in our local communities here. I've been down to the Chinatowns here. I'm starting to make friends. I want to be a valuable voice in my local area. Ultimately, that's the only thing that we can do. When you look at the grand politics of things, even here in America, for example, when you think of Democrats versus Republicans, it's a bit overwhelming. How do you make a big change in America? I always say it starts with your family, being a good family person, being influential in your family, but it also goes down to being in your community and in your neighborhood. And that is, I think, really, really important. So if you can make more connections with your family or with your community, and for me, it's for example, I've talked to a lot of Americans, and when they say, hey, wow, you've lived in China for 10 years. What was that like? Let me tell you about it. Let me tell you exactly what China was like. Well, I hear in China, you're not allowed to do anything. You're basically living under suppression. Well, actually, no, it's not entirely true. And, there's certain things you can't do, but there's a lot of things that maybe you don't know about. So let me educate you. So I think if what I've felt is here in America is that when you connect with somebody on the individual level, they're actually very open to that. When people hear, wow, Cyrus, you lived in China for 10 years. Wow, Cyrus, you speak Chinese. They're more open to hearing my observations and my viewpoints on China. So I think, again, the simplest answers to that is simply to be, more active and just try to be a bigger impact in your local community. I think that's the best thing you can do as an ordinary citizen. All right. We've got a question here from John. And hey, Cyrus, based on your last video, where did these forced cotton picking rumors originate from? Are they false or true? This is a great question. I just launched a video last night. This was pertaining to the cotton industry in Xinjiang. This is a really interesting story because, essentially what we've heard over the last, I'm going to say 10 to 15 years, we've heard a lot about the Xinjiang region of China. There's been a lot of allegations against China for mistreating its population, for carrying out a genocide against its population. But there's an interesting, statistics. When you look at the data, for example, the population of Uyghur Chinese has been increasing every single year. As an ethnic minority, Uyghurs would have been exempt from the law stating that they could only have one child. If you're a Han Chinese, you're only allowed to have one child. That law has now been rescinded. But, again, if you are one of the 56 ethnic minorities in China, you have been exempt from that your entire time. You're always allowed to have as many children as you want. You have certain benefits as being an ethnic minority, very similar to, like, say, in America. In America, right, if you're Native American, you have certain advantages as opposed to just being a regular American. I think that there's been a lot of allegations in again with this cotton industry simply because we don't know. We see a lot of cotton being produced in Xinjiang, and there is a lot of speculation that there is potential, there's potential forced labor there. But the interesting thing is that I've seen a lot of videos from people going to these regions, and again, one of the things that I follow is John Deere, our most successful tractor brand in the U.S. We've sold so many cotton harvesting machines to Xinjiang. I mean, let's be honest. If China wanted to, and capture millions of people, make them work in the slaves, in the fields, they could do it, but why would you be purchasing John Deere tractors? Something doesn't add up there. It's really, unfortunately, Xinjiang is a region that we just don't know a lot about. But knowing the fact that we have, actually John Deere maintained an office in Xinjiang for many, many years. So again, to me, it just doesn't really make sense if you have an American company selling cotton harvesting machines to a region that is supposed to have a lot of forced labor. Obviously, you get a John Deere tractor, you're going to be able to process a lot more cotton. And let's be honest, Xinjiang has a ton of cotton. They produce over 20% of the world's cotton comes from Xinjiang. So again, we don't really have any evidence of forced labor being there. We don't have any evidence of this, but it's just really a lot of people basically questioning it and just saying, look, we think this is happening. So again, that's my perspective is that, when the United States, we passed that law saying, hey, anything coming from Xinjiang, we're going to assume that it's with forced labor. Well, Skechers did a really good job. The shoe company, they did both announced and unannounced audits of the factories. And they came out and said, look, we've done our background checks. We've done our due diligence. None of our supply chains have come through with forced labor. In addition, I know Volkswagen, they have a big plant out there. They have interviewed the CEO of Volkswagen in China, obviously a German man. And he said, look, we do our best, right? We know that this is an issue. So we are making sure that every single employee that's working for Volkswagen in Xinjiang and around China, that they are treated fairly and compensated correctly. So that's my basically opinion on that. And the last question here, this is from Zach. And he says, hi, Cyrus, I appreciate your videos and I'm learning a lot. What was the most surprising part of living in China in your experience? I love questions like this because the most surprising thing for me was I really honestly think of how similar the United States and China are. Yes, there's many different cultural differences, but what I always say is that if you go to China right now, you're going to go to a Starbucks in China and you're going to see people working on a laptop. You're going to see people going to the grocery store, buying groceries, coming home and making a home cooked meal. You're going to see grandparents walking their children to school. I think every single country in the world, we're very similar in the sense that we all want to have progress. We all want to see our children live a better life than we have. And that is the common connection that I think we all have. So, people in China, they're trying to get a good job. They're trying to get a good education. They're trying to get ahead of life. Parents in China worry about their children just like parents in America worry about their children. So I think what I really took from my time in China is that, I appreciate the cultural differences. I appreciate the differences in language and culture and food. I have so many amazing memories from my time in China. I love just being on the streets. I love being a 6'4", 220-pound, white guy in China speaking Chinese and connecting with local people and, just the friendliness. I think, people in China are so welcome. I've, big, tall guy, blue eyes. People, I stick out in China. People come up to me all the time. They're curious. Tell me about America. Where are you from? What do you think about China? And there's a big sense of pride in China. I think people don't realize that. A lot of Chinese people are very proud of what their country has accomplished. And I always say, they have every right to be proud. China has done a lot of great things in the last 30, 40 years. And I understand why many people are proud to say, hey, I was born in China. Hey, I'm from China. I represent Guangzhou, or Shanghai, or wherever city I'm from. So I think that's where I think there's a lot of amazing things. And it kind of goes back to that earlier question. How do you be, a positive influence for U.S.-Sino relations? It's also very similar to how do you be a good influence in, when you're traveling around the world is just making those local connections. And I think when we look at the United States and China having a difficult relationship, I know that if I can go to China and connect with local people, the vast majority of them are amazing. They're very friendly. They're very open to working with Americans. And that's why I'm a very big advocate of preaching about, how do we do more trade together? How do we help each other's economies out? Because that ultimately is going to put food on the table on both ends in China and America. So again, I guess the most surprising part is, although the culture is very different, in many ways, we're actually very similar. And so that's kind of the message that I really try to preach on YouTube. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this very first Q&A session. This is extremely exciting for me because it's an opportunity for me to give back to you guys, but it's very real, right? Like this is, I sit down, I push record, it's one take. I'm just going to share with you my thoughts. And we're going to, keep doing this on a bi-weekly thing. So make sure if you have any questions, send them in. I'm going to do my best to get through every single question. And again, I want to just keep providing that value. So thank you for being here, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next Q&A session.